Very rare for a family to be one and done. Christina now has COVID. She is now positive, and it just breaks my heart. It is the one thing I was hoping wouldn't happen, and now it has.
A lot of my friends actually don't have jobs at the moment, and I think the job market for us is just going to get so much tougher now.
We need relationships to maintain positive psychological health, so we should make time to figure out those, even in the current climate.
How to be content, peaceful, happy, enjoy a world that is in constant turmoil and danger.
Forgiveness is the key to happiness and peace.
Forgiveness means that you are saying to yourself, I'm not going to carry this around anymore.
If you spend 27 years in jail, where you waste your life, you have no time to be negative.
To better understand the story of Bhagwan Ram's forgiveness, we have to travel back to 5th century BC Ayodhya, a city in northern India. Ram, the eldest son of King Dashrath, was groomed to be the next king. When Ram came of age and Dashrath wanted to call it quits, a meeting was called to discuss this matter. Unanimously, all ministers agreed for Ram to be crowned the very next day. News spread quickly. While the people of Ayodhya were celebrating into the nights, a situation at the palace took place. For this part, you need to understand the backstory. King Dashrath had 3 wives and a total of 4 sons. As soon as Ram's coronation was approved, one of the other mothers became jealous. This mother, Kaikeyi, actually had some leverage over Dashrath. She had 2 boons, like wishes, that she could ask Dashrath any time and any place. Kaikeyi decides to use her 2 boons at this moment. At the 11th hour, she asks for Ram to not be coronated. Dashrath couldn't believe the words coming out of Kaikeyi's mouth. The same mother who had once treated Ram as her own son was now asking for the unthinkable. But Kaikeyi wasn't done yet. She wanted her son to be the king instead of Ram. To clear the path, she wanted to send Ram in exile into the forest for 14 years. Dashrath has no words for her, only tears. What mother would wish such a curse upon anyone's son? By now, Ram has heard of this debacle and rushes to his father's room. King Dashrath had no heart to grant Kaikeyi her wishes, but Ram was the only one who managed to convince his father. Ram, the same person who has to live in the woods for the next 14 years, is asking for his father to send him away. Why? Because he didn't want his father's promised wishes to Kaikeyi to go unanswered. The next morning, the people of Ayodhya wake up expecting a celebration. But little did they know, Ram had already left. What must have Ram been thinking? To give up the luxuries of the palace and to live a bare life in the jungle. His whole life, he was meant to be the king. It was his birthright. The people wanted Ram to be king, and yet, overnight, Ram had to let all of that go. All of his expectations gone in a single moment.
Take a second with me and think back to a time in your life when someone treated you poorly, or said something unkind to you, or took something that was yours, or was unfair to you, or in some other way wronged you. How did you feel when that happened? How did you react? When we are wronged, it is human nature to feel hurt and to seek revenge. But is that the right response to being wronged? The answer depends on what we want. Do we want justice, or do we want inner peace and happiness? Instinctively, we may say, of course I want justice. If someone has made me suffer, I want him to suffer tenfold. But will wanting to make another person suffer stop our own suffering? Typically, the actual event that caused our hurt is quickly over. But if we seek revenge, that is, if we hold a grudge and become bitter, then rather than ending our suffering, we are keeping our own suffering alive. So why wish suffering upon another if this attitude is going to cause us to suffer? Wouldn't it be wiser to choose an attitude that, instead of pain, gives us peace when we are wronged? This attitude, or choice, not to seek revenge upon being wronged, is called forgiveness. And Ram Bhagwan demonstrated this attitude of forgiveness in the story we just heard. But the acceptance and peace he experienced demonstrated that he had forgiven Keikei in his heart. So true forgiveness happens inside. It is an attitude, a choice we make to not allow someone else's actions to cause us to suffer. Like Ram Bhagwan, we should strive to forgive others instantly, in our hearts, the second we feel we have been wronged. The longer we harbor a grudge and nurse our bitterness, the harder it is to forgive. But if we forgive instantly, we will experience instant peace. While this concept is beautiful in theory, how can we adopt this attitude of forgiveness in practice, especially when we are feeling overwhelmed by hurt and feelings of revenge after we have been wronged? Well, if we realize that everything happens due to God's will, and whatever God wills is for our ultimate benefit, then how is it possible for anyone to wrong us? And upon whom should we seek revenge? So the next time you feel wronged and feel the urge for retaliation, ask yourself, wouldn't I be so much better off, so much happier inside in my relationships with others and in all aspects of my life if, instead of the path of retribution and pain, I choose the path of forgiveness and peace?
It's commendable. Ram, together with his wife Sita and younger brother Lakshman, left Ayodhya, wearing only clothes made from tree bark and sacrificing their luxurious palace life for a simple life in the forests. They traveled endlessly for miles from place to place. Meanwhile, back in Ayodhya, King Dashrath, unable to bear the grief of separation from his beloved Ram, passed away. Keikei, who was beaming with joy and satisfaction, explained to Bharat how she had secured King Dashrath's promise to banish Ram and crown him as the king. Bharat listened, shocked and speechless. Angered by the actions of his mother, he told her that her wicked behavior was inappropriate. At one point, Bharat, who was placed as king in lieu of Ram, came to convince Ram himself to come back. Respecting Keikei's wishes, he did not accept Bharat's request of going back as king. Such an event can only happen when a person has forgiven the situation and moved on.
Through Ram Bhagwan's life, as we've just seen, I'm reminded how this value of forgiveness in being able to foster peace and unity is relevant throughout time. Over 19 years ago, on September 11, 2001, I was preparing to leave for class in Washington, D.C. on a clear, beautiful day, when the news hit that the nation was under attack. Terrorists had attacked the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Virginia, with a fourth plane potentially heading towards Washington. It was a time of panic and uncertainty. I can remember seeing Humvees and troops patrolling the streets of the capital that day and the days thereafter. It was truly surreal. In the midst of all of this, classes at the law school were not canceled. Rather, students gathered for class-based discussions on the traumatic and tragic events of the day. I can vividly remember those discussions, with students talking about the incredible devastation, the loss of life, and really trying to understand why this happened and to determine who was to blame. Some blamed the terrorists, some blamed foreign governments, some blamed the United States. Through our efforts to process, we were all looking backward. None of us were looking forward. Even in the months and years after that tragic day, our country continues to struggle with overcoming the trauma suffered nearly 20 years ago. 1 year later, on September 24th, 2002, after graduating from law school, I was in Saranpur, Gujarat, a far, far cry from New York City, with His Holiness Pramukh Maharaj. It was another beautiful, clear day, when the news started to come in that Akshardham, a landmark BAPS temple in India, was under terrorist attack. As the haze of those initial hours began to fade, the facts became clear. 30 people were killed. 2 terrorists were killed by special forces and many, many more were injured. Pramukh Swami's first reaction upon hearing this news, though, was simple yet profound. He immediately offered prayers for the victims and prayed for those perpetrating the attacks to realize the error in their ways. And when Pramukh Swami traveled to Akshardham after the attack, we witnessed the pinnacle of his response to this tragedy. A response that stands in stark contrast to my own experience then, a little over 1 year ago. As Pramukh Swami toured the complex and was briefed on everything that happened during the attack, there wasn't any discussion as to who was to blame or what caused these attacks. Pramukh Swami's focus was on the victims and offering prayers for them, and, incredibly, for the terrorists that caused so much destruction. Indeed, when Pramukh Swami was shown the place where the terrorists were cornered and later killed by Indian Special Forces, Swami Shri stepped forward, placed flowers at the spot, and offered prayers for the 2 that perpetrated the attack. Pramukh Swami not only forgave, but he prayed that such evil never enters the mind of another human being. In the days that followed, Pramukh Swami held a multi-faith prayer ceremony that brought society together in healing and forgiveness. That was the path forward that brought peace. And indeed, that timeless lesson is all the more relevant today, where it can seem that there is so much separating us. Reaching out, understanding, being positive, and learning to forgive is an expression of our spirituality and is the only way forward to greater unity, peace, and understanding. Pramukh Swami Maharaj taught us this valuable lesson in what is now called the Akshardham response. It's a lesson that is relevant throughout one's life. And in your case, as college students reacting to unforeseen situations and challenges, reacting with positivity and thus forgiveness will always allow you to look and move forward.
The 14 years are over. News had spread north that their Ram had won a war against the 10-headed Ravan. Their victorious Ram was now headed home. The people were overjoyed. Ram was coming back. The gloom of Ayodhya quickly faded away, one by one, as the news spread. To celebrate, each house was decorated with divos. All of a sudden, the night transformed into day. Hence, Diwali. Ayodhya could now be seen by Ram's flying chariot. At the palace, Ram's half-brothers were overjoyed of his return. Preparations were being made to coronate Ram as the rightful king. But at the back of their minds, some of them were thinking of how Ram would react when he would see Kaikeyi again. The 14 years he had to burn in hate towards her would now give him a chance at revenge. Kaikeyi had since realized her mistake and wished for Ram to forgive her. But were her actions really forgivable? Fast forward a few hours, Ram lands in Ayodhya to receive a hero's welcome. The royal family comes to greet him, all of Ram's half-brothers and mothers, including Kaikeyi. All eyes awaited the reaction of Ram. What would he do? Let's pause here. What would you do? The person that made you live in the forest for 14 years, the person whose actions led you to the death of your father, the person whose own thoughtless, misguided decision led you to nearly lose your wife, your brother, launch a war, and all that. What would you even say to them? Well, Ram, what did he do? He went to her first. He bent down and bowed down to her. That's right. He had forgiven her to the extent that he embraced her, even before embracing his own birth mother. How did he do it? 14 years to develop hate, the whole kingdom ready to support your revenge, and yet all was somehow forgiven?
When Ramchandra Bhagwan returned to Ayodhya after 14 years of struggles and suffering in the forest, the entire city of Ayodhya was waiting for him. And in front of all of the people were his 3 mothers, Kaushalya, Sumitra, and Kaikeyi. But of the 3 of them, Kaikeyi had her face down. I mean, how could she look her son in the eye? It was her fault that all of this had happened, and everyone knew it. As she was looking down, she saw something. She saw Ramchandra Bhagwan come to her and touch her feet. When she looked up, Ram Bhagwan had his hands folded, and he said to her, "Mom, thank you. He was grateful to her because he learned so much from the experience. He wasn't just forgiving her or forgetting about the mistake, he was actually thanking her. From this story, we want to learn how to forgive, how to forget, and how to move on. Remember that even a little bit of hate over time has a terrible effect on us. When I was studying in school, in college, I had a class on medical ethics. And to teach medical students the importance of unity, not competing with each other, and not trying to get revenge against a doctor or a patient who may have falsely accused you of something, one teacher did a demonstration. The professor had a student hold a pebble in his hand. He held it with his arm out. And then the professor continued his lecture. After some time, the student, he couldn't hold the pebble anymore. That little weight started to feel heavier and heavier and heavier. The professor explained then that the same goes for hate. Even a little bit over time starts to feel heavier and heavier until our soul crushes under the weight. Now, how can we work happily or effectively in any field if our mind and soul have been crushed? So the question we have is, how can we do it? How can we forgive and forget and truly move on to better things? And for that, we have to have a clear goal, or our purpose has to be clear in our mind. What do we want from our life? If we constantly reflect on this goal, then we can make sure that everything we do serves its purpose. Nelson Mandela's goal wasn't just to get out of jail. It wasn't to become the president of South Africa. His goal wasn't even to win a Nobel Prize. His one singular goal was to end apartheid. And he knew that if he wanted everyone to love and respect each other, that they would have to love and respect each other from the inside first. And that for that, he would have to remove all hate from himself. Charity begins at home. After he was released from jail, former prison guards and officials feared that he would take revenge. But Nelson Mandela was something different. He had vowed that each person who wronged him should be able to happily live in this country without fear of retribution. Greats like Ramchandra Bhagwan, Pramukh Swami Maharaj, or Nelson Mandela have taught us the same ideals: forgive, forget, and positively move on to making the world a better place for every single person living within it. Now, how can we honor their sacrifices? By taking inspiration and doing the same. Ramayana, this word literally means Ram's path. To walk on Ram Bhagwan's path is to live like him, to forgive someone the way he did. And that's why today, at the end of this celebration, when we make certain pledges to be better in the new year, make this pledge as well: to forgive someone for something they did to you. Maybe they spread some rumor about you on social media, or they said something terrible to you in public. Whatever they did, this year, forgive them and let's all move on. And by doing so, we can have a new year with a pure heart, a new year full of light and enlightenment, a new year where we walk the path of Ram, where we walk the Ramayana.